Commander Jake Morrison leaned back in his seat, watching the massive holographic display that floated in the center of the Galactic Council chamber. The blue light from the projection cast strange shadows across his face as he studied the red zone spreading across the map like a disease. The Velix sector was dying, and everyone in this room knew it. For 3 long months, the KRYX swarm had been tearing through space, destroying everything in their path. The peaceful Lurin colonies, known across the galaxy for their art and philosophy, were being wiped out one by one. Jake had seen the footage. He'd watched the recordings of the Lurin families trying to evacuate their homes as the swarm descended from the sky. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't clean. It was brutal and efficient, and it left nothing behind but empty husks of once thriving worlds. The worst part? Every single military fleet the Council had sent to stop them had failed. Not just failed, they'd been completely destroyed. The KRYX weren't just winning these battles. They were consuming the opposition, adding the destroyed ships and their crews to their own biomass. Every defeat made the swarm stronger, bigger, and hungrier. Jake watched as Council leader Vren stood up slowly from his seat. The old alien looked tired, his usually bright skin now dull and gray. Vren had been leading the Council for over 20 years, and Jake had never seen him look this defeated. Members of the Council, Vren began, his voice echoing to the silent chamber. We have lost 4 fleets. 4 entire battle groups gone. The KRYX swarm now controls 14 Lurin worlds, and they're moving toward the core colonies. We're out of options. The silence that followed was heavy. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He knew what was coming next. He'd been expecting it for weeks. We must ask the humans for help, Vren said finally, the words seeming to pain him. The chamber exploded with noise. Dozens of alien voices erupted at once. Some angry, some fearful, all of them uncertain. Jake remained quiet, watching the chaos unfold around him. He'd been Earth's representative to the Council for 18 months now, and he was used to this reaction whenever humanity came up in conversation. Humans were the new kids on the galactic block. Earth had only joined the Galactic Council 2 years ago, barely a blip in the timeline of civilizations that had been exploring space for thousands of years. Most of the older species treated humanity like children playing dress-up, cute, but ultimately insignificant. The Council knew embarrassingly little about human military strength. Every time someone asked, Earth's representatives gave vague answers and changed the subject. It had become something of a running joke among the younger Council members. Some species assumed humans were pacifists. Others thought Earth simply didn't have much of a military to speak of. A few conspiracy theorists whispered that humans were hiding something big, but they were mostly ignored. Jake pulled out his communication device and composed a message to Fleet Command back on Earth. He kept it simple and direct, explaining the situation in the Velix sector and the Council's request for assistance. He added the tactical data, the estimated swarm numbers, and the location coordinates. Then he hit send and sat back, expecting to wait at least a day or 2 for a response. Maybe longer if the bureaucrats back home needed to argue about it first. 2 hours later, his device buzzed. Jake nearly dropped it in surprise. He opened the message and read it 3 times to make sure he wasn't seeing things. The message was from Admiral Rebecca Hayes, commander of the 3rd Rapid Response Fleet. It was short and to the point. Fleet en route. ETA, 36 hours. Jake stared at the screen, his mind racing. 36 hours? That was impossible. Even with the fastest FDL drive the Council knew about, it would take at least a week to reach the Velix sector from Earth. Hell, it would take a week just to assemble a proper fleet and get it mobilized. He read the message again. There was no mistake. 36 hours. Jake stood up and walked toward Council leader Vren, who was still trying to calm down the arguing Council members. He tapped the old alien on the shoulder and showed him the message. Vren's eyes went wide. His skin color shifted from gray to a pale white that Jake had learned meant shock or fear. 36 hours? Vren whispered. That's not possible. How far away were they? I don't know, Jake admitted honestly. I sent a message to Earth, to Fleet Command. Then either your ships were already in this sector space, Vren said slowly, his voice shaking slightly, or your faster-than-light technology is far more advanced than you've told us. Jake thought about that. Both possibilities raised uncomfortable questions. If human ships had been operating in this region without the Council's knowledge, that meant Earth had been watching the KRYX situation develop and hadn't said anything. If human FTL technology was that much better than galactic standard, then what else had Earth been keeping quiet about? Vren called for silence in the chamber and announced the news. The response was mixed. Some council members were relieved. Others looked even more worried than before. A few were angry, demanding to know why humans had ships in their space without permission. Jake ignored them all. He was too busy doing math in his head. 36 hours. A response that fast meant either the fleet had already been on its way, or Earth had been ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Either way, it suggested a level of military readiness that didn't match the peaceful, slightly confused image humanity had been projecting to the galaxy. He thought about Admiral Hayes. He'd never met her, but he'd heard the stories. She had a reputation for being efficient and direct. No nonsense. If she said 36 hours, she meant 36 hours. Jake looked up at the holographic display again, at the red zones showing the KRYX advance. In 36 hours, whatever was coming would arrive, and then the galaxy would finally get some answers about what humanity had been hiding all this time. He just hoped those answers wouldn't terrify the Council more than the KRYX swarm did. The space at the edge of the Velix sector rippled like water, disturbed by a stone. Then, in a flash of blue-white light that made the observation sensors flare and adjust, the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, exactly 36 hours after their message had been sent. Right on time, down to the second. Captain David Chin stood in the center of the bridge aboard the UTSF Harbinger, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the tactical display update with incoming data. The bridge was quiet except for the sough from the computers and the occasional beep of sensors gathering information. His crew worked with practiced efficiency, each person focused on their station, faces calm and professional. David had been commanding the Harbinger for 3 years now. Before that, he'd spent 15 years working his way up through Earth's defense fleet, starting as a young ensign fresh out of the academy. He'd seen combat before, though nothing on this scale. The briefing they received about the KRYX swarm had been thorough but disturbing. An enemy that consumed everything it touched, growing stronger with each victory. Nasty business. The communication channel crackled to life, and Council Leader Vren's voice filled the bridge. There was a long pause before he spoke, as if he couldn't quite believe what his sensors were telling him. Captain Chun, Vren said slowly, our scans show only 12 vessels in your fleet. David glanced at the tactical display. 12 ships arranged in a precise formation, each one a gray-hulled monster bristling with sensor rays, and what looked like standard armor plating. Nothing fancy. Nothing obviously threatening. That's correct, Council Leader, David replied, keeping his voice neutral and professional. Another pause. When Vren spoke again, there was barely concealed disappointment in his voice, mixed with something that might have been anger or fear. 12 ships? Against millions of KRYX vessels? Captain, I don't think you understand the scale of what we're facing here. David's second-in-command, Lieutenant Emily Parker, looked up from her console. She was young, maybe 26, but she'd proven herself capable during the pirate raids near the Titan colonies last year. She caught David's eye and shook her head slightly. The Council's long-range scans were lighting up like a Christmas tree. The KRYX hadn't noticed them. Council Leader, David said calmly, 12 is sufficient for this operation. On the main display, the tactical computer painted a picture that would have made most commanders immediately order retreat. The KRYX swarm wasn't just big. It was incomprehensibly massive. Millions of bioships, each one grown rather than built, filled the space around 3 star systems. They moved in patterns that seemed almost like a living organism, flowing and adapting like blood cells in a body. And now, a chunk of that massive swarm was turning toward them. The computer estimated 50,000 individual vessels breaking off in the main formation, accelerating toward the human fleet with frightening speed. 50,000 ships. The tactical display marked them in angry red, showing their approach vectors and estimated time to contact. Emily pulled up historical data on her screen. Sir, according to Council records, That's roughly the same force that destroyed the Velix 3rd Defense Fleet 2 weeks ago. They lost 18 capital ships and over 40 support vessels in less than an hour. Noted, David said. He watched the red markers on the screen grow closer. The KRYX bio ships looked organic on the sensors, all curves and flowing shapes instead of the hard angles of constructed spacecraft. They were moving fast, probably eager to add more biomass to their collective. From what the briefing materials had said, the KRYX consumed everything. Ships, crews, stations, entire planets have given enough time. The communication channel opened again. This time it was a panicked voice from one of the Council observer ships stationed at the edge of the sector. Human fleet, you need to retreat immediately. That formation heading toward you has destroyed multiple battle groups. You don't have the numbers to survive this. Emily looked up from her console again. Sir, the Council is begging us to fall back and wait for reinforcements. David smiled slightly. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of expression that his crew had learned meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Open a channel on all frequencies, Lieutenant. I want everyone to hear this. Emily's fingers danced across her console. Channel open, sir. Broadcasting on all standard frequencies across 3 star systems. David took a breath and spoke clearly, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned through years of command. This is UTSF Harbinger to all vessels in the Velix sector. All Allied forces are ordered to clear the engagement zone immediately. Move to minimum safe distance. I repeat, clear the engagement zone. He paused, letting that sink in. On the tactical display, he could see some of the Council observer ships beginning to pull back, moving away from the space between the human fleet and the approaching KRYX formation. All weapons, David continued, are authorized to fire in 60 seconds. Harbinger out. The bridge fell silent for a moment. Then Emily spoke up, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. Sir, the Council observers are asking what they should consider a safe distance. Tell them 20,000 kilometers minimum, David replied. 30 would be better. On the tactical display, the KRYX formation was accelerating harder now, as if they sensed easy prey. 50,000 bioships moving like a wave of living death, each one designed by evolution and genetic manipulation to be a perfect killing machine. They'd torn through the Council's best fleets. They consumed entire worlds. And now they were rushing toward 12 human ships like they were nothing more than an appetizer. The countdown timer appeared on the main display. 60 seconds. The bridge crew began their final preparations, each person running through pre-combat checklists with practice efficiency. David watched the KRYX swarm approach on the sensors. They were so confident, so sure of their victory. He'd read the reports about how they adapted to enemy tactics, how they learned and grew stronger with each battle. They'd been fighting Council forces for months, and they'd learned to counter every strategy, every weapon system, every defensive tactic the galaxy had thrown at them. But they'd never fought humans before. All stations report ready, Emily announced. Weapon systems are hot. Targeting solutions locked. Defensive screens are online. The countdown hit 30 seconds. The KRYX were close enough now that the visual sensors could pick them up. Organic shapes that seemed to pulse and writhe, covered in what looked like natural armor plating. Beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way. 20 seconds. David thought about Earth, about humanity's history, about the thousands of years humans had spent learning how to kill things more efficiently. Not because they wanted to, but because Earth was a death world where everything was trying to eat everything else. Humans had clawed their way to the top of the food chain on a planet that actively tried to kill them. And they'd learned lessons that the peaceful species of the galaxy couldn't even imagine. 10 seconds. Sir, Emily said quietly, Council Leader Vren is asking if we're sure about this. David smiled again, that cold smile that never reached his eyes. He watched the timer count down. 5, 4, 3, 2. Tell him, David said softly, to watch carefully. Let's show them why Earth's predators learn to fear us. 1, 0. The moment the countdown hit 0, everything changed. Weapons Officer Kyle Turner had been waiting for this moment, his fingers hovering over his console like a pianist about to begin a concert. The young officer had trained for scenarios exactly like this at the Naval Academy on Mars, spending countless hours in simulation rooms learning to coordinate weapon systems that most species in the galaxy didn't even know existed. "Firing solution locked," Kyle announced, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his system. "Railguns are charged and hot. Permission to engage?" "Granted." Captain Davidson replied simply. "Fire at will." Kyle's fingers moved across the console with practiced speed. "Engaging now." What happened next will be talked about in galactic council chambers for generations to come. The hull of the Harbinger began to move. What every sensor and observer had assumed was simple armor plating suddenly folded away in sections, retracting like the petals of a mechanical flower opening to the sun. Beneath that innocent-looking exterior were weapon systems that made the Council's most advanced warships look like children's toys. Massive railgun batteries emerged from hidden compartments along the ship's spine and flanks. Each barrel was over 50 meters long, designed to accelerate metal projectiles to speeds that defied common sense. These weren't the primitive magnetic accelerators that some species use for mining asteroids. These were weapons that had been refined over centuries of human warfare, perfected through trial and error and necessity. And the Harbinger wasn't alone. All 12 human ships were transforming simultaneously, revealing their true nature. They'd been wolves in sheep's clothing, and now the sheep costume was coming off. "Firing," Kyle said calmly. The railgun spoke with a voice that was more felt than heard. The ship shuddered slightly as the first volley launched, thousands of solid metal slugs accelerating down the magnetic rails and shooting out into space at 12% of light speed. At that velocity, each projectile carried kinetic energy that would make a nuclear weapon look tame by comparison. The space between the human fleet and the charging KRYX swarm suddenly filled with metal death. The projectiles were small, just dense slugs of tungsten and titanium alloy. But at that speed, size didn't matter. Physics did the rest of the work. The first impacts were spectacular. A KRYX bioship, probably massing several thousand tons of organic matter and chitin armor, simply ceased to exist as 3 railgun rounds punched through it. The kinetic energy release was so enormous that the ship didn't explode so much as vaporize, turning from solid matter into a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated gas in a fraction of a second. But each projectile didn't stop there. At 12% of light speed, even hitting a massive bioship didn't slow them down much. The rounds punched through the first ship, then the second, then the third, carving straight-line paths of destruction through the KRYX formation. One particularly lucky shot managed to hit 7 ships before its energy finally dissipated. Explosions bloomed across the void like deadly flowers opening in fast motion. The KRYX formation, which had been charging forward with such confidence just seconds ago, suddenly found itself flying through a meat grinder. Ships were being torn apart faster than the swarm could react. "Energy weapons coming online," announced Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez from her station. Her console was connected to the Harbinger's particle beam arrays, weapons that used focused streams of subatomic particles to slice through enemy ships like a hot knife through butter. But Amy wasn't alone. Aboard the destroyer Valkyrie, Lieutenant Jennifer Cole was bringing her own energy weapons to bear. Targeting AI is locked on. Jennifer's voice came through the fleet communication channel. "I've got 300 distinct targets. Engaging now." The particle beams lanced out from the human ships, invisible to naked eye, but deadly beyond measure. Unlike the railguns, which fired in straight lines, the energy weapons could track and adjust their aim in real time. Jennifer's targeting computer was doing calculations at speeds no organic brain could match, identifying weak points in the KRYX bioships and exploiting them with ruthless efficiency. A beam would flash out and carve through a ship's central mass, finding whatever passed for a power core or vital organ in the organic vessels. The ship would spasm once and then go dark, tumbling through space as a lifeless husk. Then the beam would move on to the next target, and the next, and the next. 300 targets in Jennifer's queue, and she was burning through them at a rate of about 20 per second. On the Harbinger's bridge, Emily Parker was watching the engagement timer and the tactical displays simultaneously. Her job was to track the battle's progress and keep the captain informed. What she was seeing was almost unbelievable. 20 seconds elapsed, sir, Emily reported, trying to keep the shock out of her voice. Enemy force reduced by 42%. David nodded, his face showing no emotion. Continue firing. All ships maintain current fire patterns. The KRYX were trying to adapt now. The swarm intelligence that controlled them was finally recognizing the threat level they were facing. Ships began to scatter, trying to spread out and make themselves harder targets. Some attempted to accelerate away. Others tried to cluster together, as if their combined mass could somehow protect them. But human targeting computers didn't care about evasive maneuvers. Every railgun round was calculated to hit where the target would be, not where it was. Every energy beam tracked its prey with machine precision. The computers didn't get tired. They didn't panic. They didn't make mistakes. They just killed over and over with perfect efficiency. Kyle fired another salvo from the railguns. The ship shuddered again as thousands more projectiles launched into space. Ammunition reserves at 85%, he reported. We got plenty left. 40 seconds elapsed. Emily announced. Enemy force reduced by 68%. 68%. In less than a minute, the human fleet had destroyed over 30,000 KRYX bioships. Ships that had taken years to grow, that represented millions of tons of organic matter carefully shaped and evolved into weapons of war. Gone. Turned into expanding clouds of debris and vaporized biomass. The remaining KRYX ships were in full retreat now, trying desperately to escape the kill zone. But the human weapons had range that the Council's technology couldn't match. The particle beams reached out across hundreds of thousands of kilometers, picking off fleeing ships one by one. 50 seconds, Emily said. Her voice was quieter now, almost awed. Enemy force reduced by 94%. The last few KRYX vessels were scattered and broken, their formation completely destroyed. They'd gone from a confident swarm of 50,000 ships to a handful of desperate survivors in less than a minute. They tried to run, pushing their organic engines to maximum acceleration, fleeing back toward the safety of the main swarm. They didn't make it. The last ship exploded in a flash of superheated plasma at exactly 57 seconds after the engagement began. Kyle's targeting computer confirmed the kill, then went silent. There were no more targets in range. Emily stared at her console for a moment before speaking. 57 seconds elapsed, sir. All enemy contacts destroyed. 0 survivors detected. The bridge was quiet. The crew sat at their stations, processing what had just happened. They'd trained for this. They'd practiced these exact scenarios in simulation. But there was a difference between knowing you could do something and actually doing it. David looked at the tactical display, at the field of debris that had been 50,000 enemy ships just a minute ago. The human fleet was still in its original formation, exactly where they'd been when the battle started. They hadn't needed to maneuver. They hadn't needed to retreat. They just stood their ground and erased the enemy from existence. Kyle Turner let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. He glanced at the captain, then at the empty space where the KRYX formation had been. Well, Kyle said quietly, almost to himself, that was educational. The main KRYX swarm felt the deaths of their forward scouts, like a person might feel sudden sharp pain. The collective intelligence that bound millions of bioships together processed the information in seconds. 50,000 vessels gone, erased, vaporized by an enemy they had completely underestimated. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The entire swarm began to move. On the Harbinger's bridge, Emily Parker's face went pale as her sensors lit up like a holiday display. Jesus, she whispered, forgetting protocol for a moment as she stared at the incoming data. Sir, they're throwing everything at us. The tactical display painted a picture of doom. Over 2 million bioships were converging on their position from 3 different star systems. The swarm was moving like a living organism, flowing through space with frightening coordination. This wasn't a formation designed to scout or probe for weakness. This was an extinction-level response, the kind of overwhelming force that the KRYX used when they wanted to ensure absolutely nothing survived. Captain David Chen stood watching the display, his expression unreadable. 2 million ships. The largest military engagement in recorded galactic history was about to happen, and his 12 vessels were at the center of it. Then Admiral Rebecca Hayes' voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. She was aboard the carrier Washington, the largest ship in the fleet and the command vessel for this operation. Her voice came through crystal clear on the fleet channel, cold and precise as a surgical instrument. "Good," she said simply. There was no fear in her voice, no hesitation, just ice-cold determination. All ships, split formation. Execute pattern Ragnarok. Emily's fingers flew across her console, pulling up the tactical pattern that the Admiral had just ordered. Her eyes widened. "Sir, pattern Ragnarok is—" "I know what it is, Lieutenant," David interrupted gently. "Execute the order." What happened next would have seemed impossible to anyone watching. The 12 human ships, which had been holding a tight defensive formation, suddenly broke apart. But they weren't retreating or scattering in panic. Each ship accelerated on a different vector with agility that shouldn't have been possible for vessels of their size. Destroyers moved like fighters. The massive carrier Washington executed a turn that would have torn apart any Council ship through sheer gravitational stress. They weren't running away. They were repositioning themselves to create overlapping fields of fire that would turn the space around them into a death zone with no escape routes. Captain Jennifer Walsh sat in the command chair of the destroyer Nemesis, her hands gripping the armrests as her ship dove through a gap in the approaching KRYX formation. Her crew had served with her for 2 years, and they trusted her completely. They'd need that trust now. "Take us through the middle of them," Jennifer ordered. "I want to get close." Her helmsman, a calm veteran named Robert Chun, didn't even blink. "Aye, Captain." Plotting course through the thickest part of their formation, the Nemesis accelerated hard, punching into the KRYX swarm like a knife into flesh. Immediately, hundreds of bioships converged on her position, trying to overwhelm the lone human vessel. They never got close. "Point defense systems active," Jennifer announced. "Engage all targets within 1,000 kilometers." The Nemesis had been designed for exactly this kind of close-quarters combat. Her hull bristled with thousands of small automated weapons, each one controlled by lightning-fast computers that could track and destroy incoming threats faster than any organic mind could process. Missiles, projectiles, energy beams, all of them reached out and touched anything that came within range. KRYX ships exploded by the dozens, tore apart by overlapping fields of defensive fire. The Nemesis carved a path of destruction through the swarm, moving too fast and killing too efficiently for the KRYX to adapt. Deploying drone swarms, Jennifer said calmly, pressing a sequence of buttons on her command console. Hatches along the Nemesis hull opened, and thousands of small objects poured out into space. They looked almost like mechanical insects, each one about the size of a basketball, and they moved with disturbing purpose. These were autonomous combat drones, equipped with AI warfare systems that had been banned by the Galactic Council 300 years ago as too dangerous. But Earth hadn't been part of the Council back then, and humanity had different ideas about what constituted acceptable military technology. The drones spread out like a school of mechanical piranhas, each one targeting a different KRYX vessel. They were fast, agile, and utterly relentless. A group of 20 drones would swarm around a bioship, cutting through its organic armor with plasma torches and small shape charges. In seconds, they'd strip the ship down to its core, leaving nothing but a hollow shell tumbling through space. Then they'd move on to the next target. Across the battlefield, Commander Thomas Bradley watched from the bridge of the heavy cruiser Apocalypse as his ship took up position above the main swarm formation. Thomas was older than most of the other officers, a gray-haired veteran who'd served in Earth's defense forces for 30 years. He'd seen things that would give younger officers nightmares, and his face showed every year of that experience. "Gravitational weapons charging," he reported over the fleet channel, his voice steady and professional. "Target lock acquired on Formation Cluster 7. Firing." The Apocalypse had been built around a weapon system that most galactic species considered theoretical at best. Humanity had made it practical, though the power requirements were enormous. The ship's main reactor diverted almost all of its output into the gravitational projectors, building up a massive field of warped space-time. Then it released. An invisible distortion in the fabric of reality itself reached out across space and grabbed an entire KRYX formation. Hundreds of ships clustered together for mutual protection. The gravitational field suddenly inverted, and physics did the rest. The bio ships didn't explode. They didn't burn. They simply collapsed inward, crushed by forces that compressed matter beyond any natural limit. In less than 2 seconds, hundreds of massive warships were reduced to microscopic singularities, crushed into objects smaller than atoms. Then even those vanished as the gravitational field dissipated, leaving nothing behind but empty space. Target destroyed, Thomas reported, recharging for next shot. 60 seconds to full power. Back on the Harbinger, David Chin watched the battle unfold with quiet satisfaction. His crew was performing flawlessly, each officer executing their duties with precision and skill. But he had one more trick to deploy, something that would end this battle decisively. Deploying causality mines, David announced calmly into the fleet channel. Emily looked up sharply from her console. "Sir, those are still technically experimental." "They work well enough," David replied. "Deploy them along Vector 7. Standard spread pattern." Emily hesitated for just a moment, then followed the order. Her fingers danced across the console, and the Harbinger released a series of devices that looked deceptively simple. Small spheres about a meter in diameter, drifting through space on preset courses. These were causality mines, weapons that exploited quantum mechanics in ways that made theoretical physicists back on Earth argue for hours about whether they were even possible. The short version was that they created localized temporal distortions, small bubbles of space where cause and effect didn't work the way they were supposed to. The mines activated, and reality itself seemed to stutter. KRYX vessels began exploding before they reached the detonation zones. Ships that had been charging forward suddenly found themselves destroyed by explosions that had already happened, or were about to happen, or were happening in multiple timelines simultaneously. The physics were complicated and headache-inducing, but the results were simple. Anything that got near the mines died, often before it even knew it was in danger. Aboard the Council observation post, located a safe distance from the battle, dozens of alien officials watched their sensor displays in stunned silence. They'd seen warfare before. They'd witnessed fleet battles that lasted for days, with thousands of ships trading fire in carefully calculated exchanges. This wasn't that. This wasn't warfare, as they understood it. This was extermination. This was what happened when a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history learning to kill things more efficiently than anything else in their ecosystem decided that something needed to die. The human fleet moved through the KRYX swarm like sharks through a school of fish, killing with mechanical precision and terrible efficiency. There was no hesitation, no mercy, no quarter given. Just cold, calculated destruction delivered by weapon systems that seemed to come from some nightmare vision of the future. Council Leader Vren watched the display, his normally composed face showing undisguised horror. "What have we unleashed?" he whispered to no one in particular. 6 hours. That's all it took. Admiral Rebecca Hayes stood on the bridge of the Washington, watching the tactical display as the last red markers blinked out of existence. The Velix sector, which had been drowning in KRYX bioships just hours ago, was now clear. Empty space dotted with debris fields and the wreckage of what had once been the most terrifying military force the galaxy had seen in centuries. She opened a communication channel to the Galactic Council observation post. Her voice was professional and matter-of-fact, as if she'd just completed routine patrol rather than ending a 3-month war in a single afternoon. "Council Leader Vren, this is Admiral Hayes. Sector cleared. The KRYX swarm has been eliminated. We're beginning search and rescue operations for the Ren survivors now." The silence that followed stretched on for so long that Rebecca wondered if the communication system had failed. She checked her console. No, the channel was still open. They were just not responding. Finally, after a full minute of dead air, she heard Vren's voice. The old alien sounded like he'd just watched his entire understanding of reality collapse around him. 6 hours. Vren said slowly, each word careful and measured. "You eliminated a threat that we fought for 3 months. A threat that destroyed 4 of our battle fleets and consumed 14 worlds. You did this in 6 hours. Yes, sir, Rebecca replied, still not understanding why he sounded so shaken. We're now deploying medical teams to assist any survivors we find. The Harbinger's medical bay can handle up to 10,000 casualties, and each of our other ships has facilities for another 2,000. We should be able to provide immediate care for anyone who needs it. In the Galactic Council chamber, Commander Jake Morrison stood quietly, watching the other council members process what had just happened. The chamber, which was usually filled with dignified debate and careful diplomacy, looked more like a disturbed anthill. Aliens were rushing between seats, talking in frantic whispers, pulling up data on their personal devices. Jake had known this moment was coming. He'd tried to warn the council, in his own subtle way, that humanity's military capabilities might be more extensive than they appeared. But nobody had listened. Why would they? Earth was new, young, barely worth noticing in a galaxy full of ancient civilizations. A counselor from a Vexian collective approached Jake, her multiple eyes wide with what could only be described as fear. "Commander Morrison," she said, her translator converting her clicks and whistles into standard galactic language. "We need answers. Your species has hidden weapons technology that surpasses anything in the known galaxy. Why? Why keep the secret?" Jake opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut through the chamber. It came from a large display screen that showed Admiral Hayes on the Washington's bridge. "If I may address the council," Rebecca said politely. She'd switched her transmission to broadcast throughout the chamber, making sure everyone could hear her. Council Leader Vren, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 6 hours, nodded weakly. "Please, Admiral, help us understand." Another counselor stood up, an elderly representative from a species Jake didn't recognize. His voice shook slightly as he spoke. "Admiral Hayes, our records show that you brought 12 ships to the Velix sector. 12 ships against millions. Can you tell us, how many ships does humanity have in total?" There was a long pause. Then Rebecca did something that shocked everyone in the chamber. She laughed, not a cruel laugh or a mocking one, but genuine amusement, as if the question itself was funny. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, getting her laughter under control. That's a complicated question. But I think there's been a misunderstanding here." "What kind of misunderstanding?" Vren asked carefully. Rebecca's face became serious again. "This wasn't our military fleet, council leader. This was a rapid response detachment. We primarily use these units for piracy suppression and border patrol in our outer colonies. You know, keeping the shipping lanes clear, responding to distress calls, that sort of thing." The council chamber went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. "Border patrol?" Vren's voice cracked on the second word. "You used a border patrol unit to eliminate the KRYX swarm?" Captain David Chen's voice joined the conversation from the Harbinger. He sounded genuinely confused. "Council leader, you sent us a request for military assistance against hostile forces. We thought you meant an actual war, like a threat to galactic security. This was just a cleanup operation. Standard pest control, really." "Pest control," Vren repeated flatly. "You consider the KRYX swarm, which destroyed 4 of our fleets, to be pests." "Well, they were attacking civilian populations," David replied, still sounding confused about why everyone was so worked up. "That's basically piracy on a large scale. We have protocols for this." Jake Morrison watched the council members struggle with this information. He could see the gears turning in their heads, the implications slowly sinking in. If this was what humanity used for border patrol, for dealing with pirates and minor threats, then what did their actual military look like? A younger counselor, barely out of her species' equivalent of adolescence, asked the question everyone was thinking. "Commander Morrison, if this was just a border patrol unit, what does your real military look like?" Jake considered his answer carefully. The truth was complicated, and he wasn't sure how much he should reveal. But looking at the fear and confusion on the faces around him, he decided honesty was the best policy. "The ships you saw today represent about 0.2% of Earth's total defensive fleet," Jake said quietly. "We have regional defense forces, system patrol groups, deep space reconnaissance units, and rapid response teams scattered throughout human-controlled space. Those are all separate from our actual military, which we maintain for potential large-scale conflicts. How many ships? Vren asked, his voice barely a whisper. In total? Jake paused. Last I heard, approximately 40,000 combat vessels of various classes, not counting support ships, transports, and civilian defense craft, though that number changes as we commission new ships and retire old ones. The council chamber erupted into chaos. 40,000 ships. And if each one was even half as capable as the 12 they just witnessed, that meant humanity could deploy a military force capable of conquering the entire galaxy if they chose to. Why? Vren managed to ask over the noise. Why does your species need such overwhelming military force? Rebecca's face appeared on the screen again. Her expression was thoughtful, almost sad. Council leader, I think that a question that requires some context. Earth is what we call a death world. Our planet tried to kill us every single day of our evolution. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, ice ages. Everything wanted us dead. We survived by learning to fight back harder than anything else on our planet. She paused, gathering her thoughts. And then we reached space and discovered we were alone. No friendly aliens waiting to welcome us. No galactic community to protect us. Just empty space and the possibility of threats we couldn't even imagine. So we prepared. We built ships and weapons and defense systems, because that's what humans do when we're scared. We prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Jake watched understanding slowly dawn on some of the council members' faces. Humanity hadn't built this massive military because they were conquerors or warmongers. They'd built it because they were terrified. They'd evolved on a hostile world, reached space alone, and decided they'd never be vulnerable again. On the main display, human ships were already at work in the Velix sector. Medical teams were pulling their survivors from damaged stations and hidden shelters. Engineers were beginning to clear debris from shipping lanes. Transport vessels were delivering supplies and emergency equipment to the colonies that had been ravaged by the KRYX. Captain Jennifer Walsh's voice came through from the destroyer Nemesis. Admiral, we've located a Durin refugee convoy that's been hiding in the asteroid belt of the fourth planet. They got about 15,000 civilians, and they're running low on supplies. Permission to render assistance? Granted, Rebecca replied immediately. Take the Valkyrie and the Aurora with you. Make sure they have everything they need. Jake watched the human crews work with quiet efficiency, helping the very people who had minutes ago been terrified of them. It was a strange contrast. Weapons capable of destroying planets being used to deliver medical supplies and food rations. Council leader Vren approached Jake slowly, his expression unreadable. Commander Morrison, your species has had the capability to conquer the galaxy this entire time. Why didn't you? Jake smiled slightly. Because we didn't want to, Council leader. Humans learned a long time ago that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. We build these weapons to protect what we care about, not to take what belongs to others. He gestured toward the display, where human ships were working alongside grateful Durin survivors. We're good at breaking things when we need to, but we're also good at fixing them, at building them, at protecting them. That's what we chose to be. Vren was quiet for a long moment, watching the rescue operations continue. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft. I think, Commander Morrison, that the galaxy has been very fortunate that humanity chose to be protectors rather than conquerors. Jake nodded. We think so too, sir. We think so too. The emergency council session would last for 3 more days as they processed the implications of humanity's revealed military might. New treaties would be written. New alliances would be formed. The balance of galactic power had shifted in a single afternoon, but in the Velix sector, none of that political maneuvering mattered. Human crews worked tirelessly alongside Durin survivors, rebuilding what had been destroyed and healing what had been broken. And the galaxy learned a valuable lesson. When humans decided something needed to be protected, they would move heaven and earth to make it happen. And when they decided something needed to be destroyed, well, just ask the KRYX swarm. Except you couldn't, because the KRYX were gone. Yendi,